For much of the 20th century, Brooklyn was an industrial engine. It had shipyards, factories, warehouses, and ports that fed New York City's growth. Entire neighborhoods were built around steady blue-collar work. But after World War II, that foundation collapsed. Factories closed. Manufacturing jobs disappeared. Shipping moved elsewhere. And when the work left, so did the money. By the 1960s and 1970s, many Brooklyn neighborhoods were dealing with something far worse than poverty. They were dealing with abandonment. Landlords stopped maintaining buildings, banks practiced redlining, refusing loans, city services deteriorated. In areas like Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brownsville, and Bushwick, property values didn't just fall, they collapsed. Homes that once housed working families sat vacant, entire blocks decayed at the same time. Brooklyn wasn't failing because people didn't live there. It was failing because capital had decided it wasn't worth saving. But something interesting happens when prices fall far enough. Eventually, they stop making sense. And that's when the first cracks in the old narrative began to form. Long before Brooklyn became a luxury brand, it became a refuge. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Manhattan rents were climbing fast. Artists, musicians, and small creative businesses were being pushed out. They didn't move to Brooklyn because it was trendy. They moved because it was affordable. Neighborhoods like Williamsburg offered something rare: large spaces, low rents, and landlords desperate for tenants. Former factories became studios. Warehouses turned into shared living spaces. Entire floors were rented for what a single bedroom cost across the river. At first, this didn't change property values much, but it changed something else that mattered just as much: perception. Suddenly, Brooklyn wasn't just a place people left, it was a place people chose. Cafes followed the artists. Music venues followed the cafes. Small galleries followed the venues. And while none of this made headlines at the time, it sent a quiet signal to investors watching closely. If people were willing to move in without incentives, what would happen if real money arrived? That question would soon be answered. By the early 2000s, Manhattan real estate had entered a new phase. Prices weren't just high, they were unreachable. For many buyers, owning in Manhattan stopped being a goal and started being a fantasy. Brooklyn, by contrast, still offered something rare in New York City: space at a discount. Suddenly, neighborhoods once dismissed as too far or too risky were being re-evaluated. The commute didn't change. The buildings didn't change overnight. But the math did. A brownstone in Brooklyn cost a fraction of a comparable home in Manhattan. And for buyers priced out across the river, that difference mattered more than reputation. Developers noticed too. Large-scale projects began appearing along the waterfront. Old industrial land was rezoned. New residential towers promised views, amenities, and proximity to Manhattan. This wasn't organic change anymore. This was capital moving with intention. And once major money enters a neighborhood, everything accelerates. But the most powerful force in Brooklyn's transformation wasn't construction, it was infrastructure. Real estate doesn't move in straight lines, it moves along transit. Brooklyn already had one of the most extensive subway networks in the city. What changed was how people used it. As Manhattan jobs concentrated in fewer higher-paying sectors, commuting became a trade-off people were willing to make. Living farther out was acceptable if it meant ownership, space, or stability. Neighborhoods with direct subway access suddenly became viable again. Stations that once felt neglected became gateways to opportunity. Every new coffee shop near a train stop increased foot traffic. Every renovation increased perceived safety. Every new resident made the area feel more permanent. This created a feedback loop. More people meant more services meant higher rents. Higher rents justified higher property prices. And once that loop starts, it's hard to stop. But there was one final shift that sealed Brooklyn's fate. It wasn't about money or transit, it was about identity. At some point in the 2010s, Brooklyn stopped being described as an alternative. It became the destination. Living in Brooklyn wasn't framed as a compromise anymore. It became a statement. Neighborhoods like Park Slope developed reputations for schools, culture, and lifestyle. Brooklyn food scenes were written about globally. Brooklyn aesthetics were copied internationally. The borough developed something rare in real estate: Cultural gravity. People didn't just want housing. They wanted to belong to the idea of Brooklyn. And when identity enters the equation, prices stop being rational. Buyers weren't comparing square footage anymore. They were comparing narratives. That shift turned Brooklyn from an undervalued market into a premium one almost overnight. But this rise didn't happen evenly. Some neighborhoods skyrocketed faster than others. And that unevenness would create tension that still shapes Brooklyn today. As values rose, so did displacement. Longtime residents saw rents climb faster than wages, property taxes increased, buildings changed hands. Some homeowners benefited enormously. A house bought decades earlier suddenly became a life-changing asset. Others weren't so lucky. Renters faced constant uncertainty. Small businesses struggled to survive. Entire communities were reshaped in a single generation. Brooklyn's transformation created wealth. But it also exposed how unevenly that wealth was distributed. This is the part of the story that rarely fits neatly into a highlight reel. Because real estate booms don't just create winners, they also rewrite who gets to stay. And Brooklyn became the clearest example of that tension playing out in real time. So where does that leave Brooklyn today? Brooklyn's transformation wasn't magic. It followed a pattern we've seen before: disinvestment, neglect, cultural revival, capital inflow, rebranding, price explosion. What makes Brooklyn different is how completely it flipped the narrative. From forgotten borough to global symbol, from financial risk to generational wealth engine, but it also serves as a reminder. By the time everyone agrees a place is valuable, the opportunity is already gone. Brooklyn didn't become expensive because it was obvious. It became expensive because for a long time, it wasn't. And that is the quiet rule behind every great real estate transformation. By the time the story is widely told, the chapter that mattered most has already passed.